We're talking today with Lloyd Hansen of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Lloyd, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born on July the 4th, 1925, in Jamestown, North Dakota. But I didn't live in North Dakota very long. I'm told that before I was 3 months old, I was number 6 in the family, and before I was 3 months old, they moved to California. So I've been a traveling man all my life, I guess. But eventually we came back to Michigan, so I consider Michigan as my home state.
Okay. Now, what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My dad was, he did several things. At the time I was born, he was working for the Jamestown Sun as part of the newspaper. But he became the general missionary of the American Sunday School Union. Now, the American Sunday School Union is an organization that went out into the rural areas where there wasn't any churches, and they would start a Sunday school in a schoolhouse. And so he had some others working with him, and he worked in Michigan. He also, when we moved to California, he was the General Secretary of the American Sunday School Union in California, and we moved back to Michigan.
And then where in California were you living?
Well, that was before my memory began.
Okay.
So they lived several places, I don't really know.
So when did you come to Michigan then?
I came to Michigan from North Dakota when I was in the 4th grade, and some people, now like my wife, she remembers going to kindergarten and what time she had and all of that, and so she remembers the teachers and students' names in the kindergarten. But my memory basically started when we moved to Michigan, and I was in the 4th grade. So I don't really have memories of anything before the 4th grade.
Okay. And then where in Michigan did you move to?
We lived in the Lincoln Consolidated School District, which is south of Ypsilanti, Whitaker, Willis, and that area. It was a consolidated school that Henry Ford came out and consolidated 17 one-room schoolhouses and built a big building, and so we were part of that big building. And I, at the time, didn't realize what a wonderful school it was. We had an auditorium with slanted floors and theater seats, and we had the stage with all the curtains and everything, and 2 gymnasiums, and a gymnasium with a balcony around the edges of it. And Henry Ford actually came out to visit us when I was there and sat in the balcony when some sports-based basketball and so on were going on.
Okay. Now, did people living in that area, did some of them work for Ford, or was this just out in the country still?
This was just out in the country. It was a consolidation of 17 schools, and nobody walked to school. The school building was just built on the corner of Willis Road and Whitaker Road, right out in the country, so everybody came to school on buses. So we were there during the noon hour, and we went home on the bus. Once you went to school, you were at school until they took you home. So it wasn't in a town where you could go off and you couldn't go any place. There wasn't any place to go.
All right. Now, was your father still working for the Sunday school group, or was he doing something else now?
No, he was. That's why we were in Michigan now at that time, because he was working with the American Sunday School Union. So, and he didn't get a big salary, so we were considered. I was one of 9 children, and we were considered one of the poor families, and used to get boxes of food and used clothes from church groups and that sort of thing. So it was an interesting. Don't see any bad parts about it. It was a good life we lived. So.
All right, and then you mentioned. Now, were most of the people in the area farmers?
Well, at that time, you see, it's just during the war, and the bomber plant in Ypsilanti was going, and in fact, my mother worked in the bomber plant.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's father worked in the bomber plant, and but so they worked. The Ypsilanti had a generator plant and some other plants. So.
Okay, so at least by 1940 or so, kind of war industry is picking up, and a lot of people are going and working there.
Yeah.
And as far as you can tell, I mean, had there been a lot of farming earlier, or was this getting more built up?
It was getting built up when I was there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's little towns like Milan and Willis and Whitaker, and then people like my folks like to live out where they could have a farm more or less, have a big, not a farm, but a big garden.
Big garden, yeah.
And did a lot of canning and stuff in the wintertime.
All right. Now, you mentioned before we started the interview, at what age did you start driving?
At that time, anybody who lived in the country, I'm not sure whether it went for the city people, but if you lived in the country, you were considered a farm family.
Mm-hmm.
And any farm family, if your dad would take you into the county building at the age of 14, your dad would sign for you and you could get a driver's license. So I got my driver's license when I was 14 years old. And I did a lot of driving. That's when I went into the service, was drafted into the service. I volunteered at the training camp to be put in as a truck driver, so because I had done a lot of driving.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, and so you got to do it. You mentioned you had. When did you meet the woman who was going to be your wife? How old were you then? We went to the same school and the same church, so I actually borrowed my brother's car when I was 14, had my license, and I drove over to see her when she was 12. So, but we just grew up together, same church and same community and same school. She was 2 years behind me, so, but we knew each other all that time. Okay. Now, you're still in school when the war starts. How did you first hear about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I don't remember. Lots of people remember when they heard it on the radio, but I don't remember hearing it on the radio. Of course, in my class, by the time we graduated, most of the boys had been drafted or volunteered for the Army, and so there's only 10 of us boys left in the class to graduate, because the others are all gone. I didn't actually. My older brother volunteered and went into the Air Force, and so when I was a senior, I knew that eventually I'd have to go into the service. So I did go to Selfridge Field and took took exams to get into the Air Force, but what they say, my depth perception, they put me on a machine and I couldn't get to the cards to mash up, and so they said, no, you can't. You gotta have depth perception to be in the Air Force. So I didn't. So I waited to be drafted.
All right. And then when did you get drafted?
Well, of course, you had to sign up for it. But was it as soon as you were 16?
Or 18, I think. Yeah.
Well, when I was 18, I signed up, and I was in July, and I was drafted by November, I think it was.
Yeah, that's 1943.
Yeah.
Right.
43.
Now, did you have a job then?
No. Well, Uh, that was, see, just after I graduated from high school,
Mhm.
and I did go to Ypsilanti, and I worked at the foundry, doing work there at the foundry, but that didn't last very long. 'Cause
Yeah. So you just started, but you did finish, but you graduated from high school.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. You finished high school, and you were working at the foundry, just waiting until they took you. Was that the idea?
Right,
Okay.
right. I was a minister, or I had, my plans were to become a pastor,
Mhm.
and the church that I attended and the conference, they went through all the processes properly to have me deferred as a ministerial student. They
Mhm.
wrote letters and forms and so on, sent to the draft board, but the draft board didn't honor them at all.
Mhm.
So when my name came up, I went in.
Yep, that point they needed bodies, and that was sort of
Yeah.
how it worked. Okay.
That's the way it works.
So then, now where do you report first? Once you're called up, where do you go?
From Ann Arbor, we went to Battle Creek, to the camp there,
Yeah, Custer.
Custer, and that's where I got my uniforms and all of that sort of thing. And then from Camp Custer, we went to I think we went right out to California to the training camp.
All right. And what camp were you sent to in California?
In California, when on the train, of course, it was a long train with lots of people on it, and in our car that I didn't know much about Army camps, but there were some people who did, and it seemed like we'd go along, and every once or twice a day, the rumor would come back, oh, we're going to go to someplace, but then we went right by that city. And so when we got to California and the train started north up into the mountains, then the rumor came, you're going to Camp Roberts. And that's a big infantry training camp, so you're all going to be infantry. But that wasn't so. My history has always been one of these where you get shoved off, a few of you here, and the rest of them go on. But so we got to Camp Roberts, and two of the passenger cars were cut off from the rest, and they took us around, and we were in the artillery, not the infantry, at Camp Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
Although Camp Roberts, as most people would know, is the infantry training, but they needed some artillery to fire over the head of the infantry during the training, so they needed an artillery group, so I was put into the artillery. And
All right. Now, what kind of reception do you get? You show up at the training camp, and they take you to the part of the base you're supposed to go to. What do they do with you once you arrive?
well, the train car pulled in, and they took us off of the train car and lined us up and called us by name, and they separated us, and we were put in artillery rather than the infantry, and a barracks full, and put us in the barracks. This is where you're going to live.
All right. Now, what was basic training like?
Well, again, that's where being shoved off, or I did it I requested, they wanted to know in the artillery is who wants to be, is it any truck drivers, anybody want to be a truck driver? So I volunteered to go into the truck driving. So my basic was, I suppose, relatively easy, because as a truck driver, you didn't go any marches, 50-mile marches or anything like that. You were a truck driver. And so we were separated off, and I passed the exams to be a truck driver. And so actually the basic training was relatively easy compared to what others had as a basic training.
So you were really being used in kind of base support services. You were moving guys around or supplies around.
Well, during basic training, you didn't do much of that. You did, near the end of basic training, we did some took the trucks out and made some, what do they call it? I forget what the name of the word is. But anyway, it was relatively, I think, easy basic training.
Okay. Yeah. How much emphasis did they place on discipline and following orders and that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, they did, which didn't bother me because I didn't mind following orders. In fact, to show you, all of basic training, I was only put on KP once to work in the kitchen, and some of the men got into the kitchen more than once.
Okay. Now, the men you were training alongside, were a lot of them from Michigan or the Midwest, or were they all over the place?
All over the place. I didn't know anybody in basic training, and I did get acquainted with two other boys, twins, whose names were Hansen, Bob and Bill, and in basic training. They were in the same outfit that I was, but they were in a different barracks. But so we told people we were cousins, but we weren't.
That's right, because you'd gotten split off from all the guys that you had gone in with and everything else, and so
Yeah.
you're now just in this separate group.
We got split off. I got split off all during my Army life. In fact,
Now, about how long did you spend at Camp Roberts?
I don't know how long the basic training is. 6 months, I think.
Well, the basic part is shorter than that, but then their training can continue, or if you're
No, well, just as soon as the training was over, we were, and that's another place where was split off because they lined us up and they gave us our orders of where we were going next, and there was half a dozen or 10 maybe that got sent to camp. What was this? Near Boston, and all the rest of them stayed in California to go to outfits to the South Pacific. But I was sent with not with a group because they gave us a furlough, our orders where we're going next, and so I was able to come back to Michigan in between and then go to Boston to be into a group there.
Okay. Now, were you going to be? Did you stay at the base outside of Boston for a long time, or was that just a brief stop on the way overseas?
Yeah, just a brief stop. I would say maybe a month or so, and I enjoyed it because in Boston they asked particularly for truck drivers to go down to the docks and gave us some forklifts, and we spent time there every day almost going. I never driven a forklift before, but I learned fast, and we were to take bombs with our forklift up on the forklift and go out to the docks and load them onto ships. So we didn't just sit around. We had to do.
All right. Now, back when you were at Camp Roberts, I guess I have the impression that you're there a number of months. So you said about 6 months, you think, or around there. Okay. Did you get to go off the base much?
Well, that's another thing I don't know. I'm sure that probably no other Army person was able to do this, but right in the middle of basic training, my grandfather, who lived in Pasadena, not far from Camp Roberts, was his 81st birthday, and I was 18. And so I went to the headquarters, and I said, "Can I get a 3-day weekend pass to go down and see my grandfather's on his 81st birthday?" And it was granted. Have you ever heard of anybody in the middle of basic training getting a 3-day furlough?
Not if you were in the first couple of months. After that, then you're at a little bit different level. But
Of course, I think one thing that I don't know, but I think one thing that might have helped was that my uncle, who was a colonel, was at Camp Roberts.
You can get.
Is it on?
Yeah. Now you
I-
mentioned you had
Yeah.
an uncle who was a colonel.
I think I was able to get that 3-day weekend pass because my uncle Percy, who was a colonel and who was stationed at Camp Roberts, because his outfit had been sent overseas, but he was too old to go with them,
Mm-hmm.
and he was in charge of the court-martial board. And I don't know, nobody's ever said that
Mm-hmm.
reason why I got a 3-day pass, but I'm sure it had something to do with it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, aside from that, I mean, did you get to go into Los Angeles or anywhere else?
No, I didn't. We didn't. We went into Paso Robles and
Mhm.
the town on the weekends. We
Right.
could go in, and that's all. We
Okay.
never get away from
But you were a little bit too far from Los Angeles proper to kind of get down there and
Yeah.
see all the stuff done. Did they have USO or anything like that at Camp Roberts? Was there entertainment of any kind?
I don't know. I didn't go to them.
Okay.
I went in. Went into church and
Mhm.
on the weekend, and that's all I did.
All right. Okay, so you're at Camp Roberts, then you go out to Boston, and then you said you're there about a month,
You're right.
and you're working with the loading docks and the forklift and all of
Right,
that.
right.
And then when do you ship overseas?
We went overseas right to England, and we were very fortunate in that we were loaded on, not on some old freighter that took forever, but I forget, Queen Mary or something,
Mhm.
some luxury liner
Yep.
that in 9 days, I think it was, we got into London. And of course, then we were taken off and sent to I don't know just where, but to a motor pool someplace.
Do you know roughly when you crossed? Was it in the spring of '44 or?
Yeah, in the spring of '44. So
And what was the weather like when you went across?
it was fine, really
Okay.
nice weather, and we were on a luxury liner, and it amazed me how the ocean looked like it was solid. You would think you could step off in it, but of course you couldn't. But that's the way it looked. And we did on the way over the luxury liner. All of a sudden would zigs, and it would zig, and they said that they evidently saw a German sub someplace, and so they were zigzagging to get away from the submarine.
I think it was standard procedure. I mean, the ship sailed by itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was fast enough. It didn't need to be in a convoy.
No, it was all by itself. Yeah.
But they still did the evasive maneuvers just as
Just
procedure. Yeah.
That's what we were told.
Right. Okay. And do you remember where you landed when you got to England?
No, I really don't remember. I guess I'm not very observant.
Or did you get off someplace and get on a train and go somewhere else?
Yeah,
Or-
we just got off and got on a train, and we were sent out someplace to a motor pool,
Mhm.
and we didn't do much driving. I guess I drove twice for a captain or something, but I guess I wasn't spit polish enough. I think he was looking for a driver for him to,
Mhm.
but because he just didn't really go anyplace, had me go over to a sand pit and
Mhm.
around and take him back, and that's all there was to it.
Now, were you assigned to a unit at this point, or
Oh,
were
no.
you just an individual?
Just a replacement.
Mhm.
I did, while I was there at the motor pool, though, after I drove this cabin, nothing happened. They took, I don't know, 10 of us or a dozen of us and sent us to radio school. They was going to teach us to be radio operators, and which meant that we would have been out in front of the infantry or with the infantry with our radio. And when we were out to this radio school where it was, that was D-Day. So in that way I was split off at the right time, and I wasn't a truck driver to go across the channel. I was out at radio school, and I didn't pass the Morse code, and so they sent me back to radio school.
Or back to the motor
The
pool?
motor pool.
Yeah.
Back to the motor pool. And a week or two later they took some of us and sent us out on the Salisbury Plains in England. and we were to get infantry rifleman training, 6 weeks. And the Salisbury Plain, and if anybody knows about it, is just, it's a flat place with limestone underneath. And when we were getting our infantry training, they said, now, you go out here, and they gave us directions, and when you stop, you have to dig you a foxhole. Well, but they said, this is all limestone, so you're not going to dig a foxhole, so just make a mark on it. This is your foxhole. And so that was strictly rifleman training, and we did that. And we came, when we came back, then we were sent as replacements over from there across. The war had gotten way into France there, almost to Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went down, and they put us in truckloads. I mean, I don't know how long we spent there, but then we went down to the Channel to wait to get a boat to go across to France, because the war had gone down almost to Paris by then. And so finally we got on a little ship, and boy, was it rough going across that channel. I heard that if you tend to get seasick, what you want to do is get down to the lowest part of the boat as you can, and into the middle where it's most level, and that's what I did. But
did that work?
Yeah, it worked. I didn't get really too bad seasick at that time. And when we got to across the channel, then we were just replacements. And
a couple of questions just to back up a little bit. While you were in England, did you have any contact with the civilian population there?
No, well, just one contact. I don't remember their name, but when we were going to where we were to stay, we had to ride the English trains, and English train is all in little compartments, and I was in one of these little compartments with another family with 3 children and the mother, and I told her where I was going, and she said, "Oh, that's a stop just before where we get off." And I got her address, so I knew it was close to where we were going to go for training, and so I got her address, and when I was in that first training camp, I got a pass. I don't think it wasn't an overnight pass.
Yeah, it's a day pass, yeah.
Day pass. And so I got on a train and went to her house. Before I went there, though, I went to the kitchen and got a bag full of oranges. I don't know how much, just a small bag of oranges. And I took them up there, and I found her house, and I just told her that I was able to get out, and here's some oranges for the kids, and you can give each of them an orange. And she said, "Oh no, we can't get oranges around here. I'll hide them away, and we'll peel them and give them one little piece at a time." And so that's the only contact I had with any civilians in England.
Now, were there other men in the units that you were with who were kind of going off base or going to the pubs or doing that kind of thing?
I don't know. I'm sure they did, but I didn't.
Right. Okay. All right. So now you crossed the channel. Now, were you crossing the channel in sort of just a small transport ship, or was it an LST, or do you know what you were on?
It was just a transport ship. It wasn't very big.
And then where did you land?
When we got to France?
Yeah.
Don't ask me.
Okay. Well, was it sort of a harbor, or did you have to get off onto a beach, or?
No, it was sort of a harbor, and we got off and went up and got into trucks and started as replacements out across England.
Or France, rather.
France, I mean, yeah.
Okay. And then at this point, now, do you think this is sort of August of 44? Because we get to Paris in August, and then keep going beyond that.
Well, yeah, it was, I don't know, sometime, yeah, July, August, because we went in trucks from one replacement camp to the next and to
Okay.
the next, and I don't know how
So you
many.
keep moving forward as the American
Yeah,
forces are going
right.
forward.
And one time, I made a lieutenant real mad at me. In fact, I bunked with the sergeant after we left there, and he said, "You came nearly getting beat up," because I wrote home, and I said that the lieutenant here reminds me of a red-headed officer in the last replacement camp, because he would come so drunk he couldn't march us at all. He didn't start us on the right foot and all that. And this captain, he was a captain, he called me in and he said, "I think I'm going to court-martial you for what you said in your letter." And I said to the captain, "Do you still have the letter? Did you censor that letter or somebody else?" "Well, no, Lieutenant was reading it, and so he showed it to me, and I said, "Do you still have it?" And he says, "Yes, I got it, and so I think I'm going to court-martial you." And I said, "You can't do that." He said, "What?" Well, I said, according to the Army laws, when you censor a letter, you either have to cut out that you want to, or you leave it and send it. And you're not supposed to show the letter to anybody else. And you weren't the first one to censor it. And even if you were the first one to censor it and you still had it, that's against the law. You're supposed to send it out. And, and he knew I was right, and he got mad. He dismissed me, and that's when the next, I don't know, down the line, when it was in some other replacement, his sergeant was in the tent with me, and he said, that captain said, "You catch that little bastard," and beat him up, and he told him, "Wow," and I said, I told the captain, "Well, he's so little, I can't do that." So I didn't get beat up.
Yeah, but I guess you learned the part where whatever you write in a letter, your officer is going to see.
Oh yes, yeah, we knew that.
So you have to be careful what you say
Right,
about them that's personal.
don't try to write codes in there or something, to tell information that you aren't supposed to.
But don't insult the man who's going to read the letter.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
All right. Now, how much time do you think you spent kind of in the different replacement depots or just in transit once you get across the channel? How long is it before you actually join a unit?
Well, it was probably months, I guess, before we went from one replacement camp to the next, before we got to a line outfit.
So how are you spending your time when you're in these replacement units? What are they doing with you?
Oh, I guess it didn't bother me. I mean, you read or you just sit, look.
Okay. But there wasn't, I guess you mentioned they did a little bit of training or marching or something?
Yeah, they to give you exercise, they would get you up and take you out and make you march and make you exercise and keep you healthy, but there wasn't really any training.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we took guns apart and cleaned them and all that, whether they needed them or not, just to keep us trained.
All right. And then, I don't know, what impressions did you have of the French countryside you were in or the places you went to or saw?
Yeah, the countryside was beautiful, well kept, with hedgerows and so on, which, of course, I went, have hedgerows in the United States, so your property's bound by a fence, but not by a hedgerow. They wasted a lot of land, I think.
Yeah, well, you divide your small fields. I mean, in Normandy, the hedgerows were very big and military obstacles. Once you get farther east, probably not as big or closer to what you were used to.
Yeah, right. And we kept moving to get up to a line outfit. So
Okay. Now, when did you actually get assigned to a unit?
I don't know what the date is. It's probably in my record someplace. But we were way up in France and in a mountain area because when they took us there, the headquarters was in a cave in the mountain, and you could hear the firing. We were right up to front line almost, and and that's another place where I was cut off because when I went into the cave where the commanding officer was sitting behind a desk, and he looked at, "Oh, I'm glad to see you. I see you're heavy weapons. You know all about machine guns," which I hadn't had any training at all, but he put me behind a machine gun.
Now, why did he think you were heavy weapons?
Why did he?
Yeah.
Just because he needed heavy weapons people.
Well, wasn't it because you had been in the artillery training?
Well, the artillery, but I was in artillery, and artillery wouldn't give us any training in machine guns or anything.
But artillery was a heavy weapon.
Yeah, it was a heavy weapon. And the only machine gun training, but I don't remember having any, was that our trucks had a machine gun on it, but we never used it. But
Okay. But when you were doing the infantry training, was that only with the M1 rifle?
Yes, it was only with the M1 rifle. It was strictly riflemen.
Because infantry units had 30 caliber machine guns attached to them, but you weren't training on those.
No, we weren't trained with machine gun, no. In fact, this is Army life, I guess, the first night that I was with the line outfit in heavy weapons with machine guns, they took us down and set us behind a hedgerow and told us to cut a hole through the hedgerow and set our machine gun up, have a 50 caliber, and which I had never seen before even then, and told us what we'd do in the morning and how to set it and so on, and aim it up and fire over the infantry that would be moving forward. And so that's what we did, and we dug a deep foxhole behind the machine gun, and in the morning we fired and did what we were told to do, and then the machine guns though fouled and they jammed up, and so we jumped down into our foxhole, and it's a good thing we dug a deep foxhole because we had more and got down in our foxhole, and we heard a mortar shell coming. They make a sound that you don't forget. And boy, we laid down on the bottom of our foxhole and blew up. We heard it blow up, and then we listened, and it was quiet and no more coming in or anything. So we stood up, and the hedgerow was gone. Our machine gun was flopped over backwards, and the raincoat I put on up out of the dirt that we had dug out of the foxhole was all riddled. So my first day on the line outfit almost was my last day.
How far was your foxhole from the actual machine gun?
Oh, 10 feet. Or so.
So a little bit back from the line, but not very much.
Not far back.
Okay. And you mentioned the guns getting fouled. Were you in a unit of machine guns that were firing like a battery?
There was, I think, 5 of us along there, and they had quit firing before we did. Ours was the last one to get jammed.
Okay.
The rest of them got, because none of us had 50 calibers before.
So you didn't really know how to maintain them or keep them clean?
Yeah, how to adjust them and so on.
So they're all knocked out. Okay. Now, after that, then what happens?
Well, of course, from there, they started moving us up. We were on the front line, but they just started moving us up. And I was with a H company, which was a heavy weapons, and they moved us.
Okay.
the rest of the time that I was in there, we did a lot of walking, but of course I didn't want to be a machine gunner, and so I never, if the first machine gunner that did the shooting would something happen and then they'd have to replace him, I didn't move up. If somebody else came on, let them be the machine gun. I just carried the ammunition. That's enough for me.
And how many men were in a machine gun crew?
I think there's 5 of us.
Okay. And were you just otherwise just loaders or ammo carriers?
Yeah.
Okay.
And which was nice. I'm glad they did that, because the infantry that we were with, at night, they had to go out on patrols to see if there's find any Germans or anything. The machine gunners, all you did was you set up a guard post and set your machine gun up and be ready in case you had to use it, and then you stayed there. You never did go out on a night patrol. It was, and our lieutenant often found us a chicken coop or something that we could be in, and because we weren't going out on patrols, as long as we had our machine gun set up and somebody out there to maintain it.
Okay. Now, just for reference here, what division were you assigned to?
I was with the 79th Division, but as a replacement.
Right. And the regiment was 315. Yeah, it's 315th Infantry Regiment, and you're with the Heavy Weapons Company.
Right.
Okay. All right. And they're operating at this point kind of in the Vosges Mountains, northeastern France, and on the frontier with Germany.
Right.
Right.
Actually, according to the records, I was in 2 campaigns. The German to go into Germany from France, but also the Southern France campaign. But I don't know how that's just
I think,
Army records.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the designation for the units in the 7th Army, which were in that area of France, because they'd come up from the south and then they got up into northeastern France, and that's where you joined them. But that must be what the label the Army was using, or they just...
I had nothing to do with that. I just see that on the records.
Yeah, so you didn't even get to go to the south of France. You know, they just stuck it on your record.
Yeah.
All right. So you're doing this now. What's the weather like as you're out campaigning now?
Well, I don't remember any bad weather. It seemed like that we always had good weather. So, because I don't remember, we had a raincoat, but I don't remember having any bad weather at all.
So you don't remember spending a lot of nights being cold and wet in the foxhole someplace?
No, I sure didn't.
All right. And so you basically kind of join the unit sort of sometime in the fall, and then you're with them. Are you mostly attacking and moving forward, or holding a line, or what are you doing?
Well, we're basically just moving forward, just keeping the line straight. But we hadn't been on the front line very long when the 79th was pulled back for R&R, rehab and recuperation or something, and we went to an old chicory plant, and there we did some training and some rest and wrote some letters. And I was a ministerial student, and so one day the chaplain came to me and he said, "I hear you're a ministerial student." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Would you help me in a baptism?" We were right along a river. And I said, "Sure." 5 men wanted to be baptized, and so, boy, when we left the chicory plant and out into the river, I realized why he needed help, because it's by immersion in the river. And you got to the edge of the river and you looked across the river, and it was right down at the foot of the mountain, and there was snow up on the mountain. So that water was cold. And we really struggled, but we did baptize 5 men there in that river. and the rest of the time it was just rest and recuperation. So.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were to go back on the front line, of course it was a front line, and so we were sort of kept as reserves,
Mm-hmm.
not on line, and we would be there in a camp, and then we would get moved to someplace else because they thought they was going to need some
Reinforcements.
some reinforcements down the line, and then we'd wait a while, and we'd wait a while, and finally they said you're going to get on the front line now. You have to replace the Rainbow Division. We are, so we went in to replace the Rainbow Division, and that's when our group moved into Hatton. And I never saw any of the Rainbow Division, but I was told that they had been a fresh division right from the United States, and it was their first experience on the front line.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in the houses. I went up in one house where we were there in this town of Hatton, and there were half-written letters that the people had, and we were told never to go up into the upstairs if the artillery or something comes in. Mm-hmm. You don't have any escape. But anyway, evidently they were pushed out, and we went in to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was wounded. Since then, I've been back in there in a traveling tours,
Mm-hmm.
and we went back into that town, and I took pictures of the house where we were in the barn. I was standing guard in the barn when a mortar shell blew the barn wall into my face, and then I started back through the hospitals. But I had heard, never go back to where you were in the service, it won't look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that town, it looked the same. The first house in the street, it was demolished as we walked up the street to go in there,
Mm-hmm.
and when we went back, I took a picture of it because it looked just like I remembered.
Mm-hmm.
And I found the house where we'd been, and took a picture of the barn, which had been replaced.
Now, is this town today, is that in Germany or is it in France?
This would be in France. We had gone into Germany, but we had pulled
Mm-hmm.
out to straighten the line, so this is in Hatton, France.
Okay. But it's kind of pretty close to the border with
Yes,
Germany there.
It's right close to the German border.
Okay. And then how long were you actually in that town? Just a day or so before you got hit, or?
Oh, no, it was probably a week or so. It wasn't very long.
Okay. Did you ever see anything of the Germans?
No, I don't think I ever saw a German. Well, I take that back. When we were going across countries, France,
Mm-hmm.
we'd go through woods, and sometimes we'd see a dead body in the creek or something, and I don't know whether it's German or American, but so I might have seen a German. I don't know.
But you didn't see any enemy soldiers
No.
while they were
No.
active and so forth. So they're just whoever's shooting at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time we were in a kind of a swampy area, and by a highway, and we were sort of pinned down because the Germans had the hills beyond us,
Mm-hmm.
and they were shooting anti-aircraft down at us, but of course anti-aircraft, when it hit the trees, it exploded, so
Mhm.
it didn't really get any of us, but it was sure terrifying to have that anti-aircraft going off on the trees.
Now, did you ever get hit with heavier artillery or just anti-aircraft and mortars and light stuff?
Just the light stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And did you ever see any aircraft going over?
No, we never saw any aircraft.
You didn't have any support, American air support?
Not that I know of.
Would you have artillery support that you know of? I mean, were we shooting at them, or not that you were aware of?
Nothing that I was aware of.
Okay.
We had a French outfit that was to our right,
Mm-hmm.
and boy, we were told, to be quiet. And if you had any, we didn't have a Jeep, but if you did, those French people were, at night, they were noisy and running their Jeeps, and they had the lights on, and we wondered about them, but they were good, because after that time that we were there, we went forward and up a highway, and right up the top of the hill there was a German 88, and that's a big artillery.
Yeah.
And it was pointed right down the road where we were coming up. But then we were told that those crazy French people had gone around and gotten behind them and and got them out of the way before we got there to go up that hill.
Yeah. All right, because the French had North Africans, they had all kinds of people in that army that they brought with them, and some of them were mountaineers.
Yeah.
And could do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I was glad they were there.
All right. But ultimately, are there other things that you remember about the time in the field before you get hit that kind of stick with you or come back to you?
No, I guess I wasn't wise enough to be afraid. So.
All right. Now, when you did get hit, was that part of an ongoing barrage, or was that the first round that landed and got you? Or
There was, as far as I know, it was the first and only one. I don't know if I've wondered since we had a hole, not very big, 8-inch hole through a wall, whether they saw it and realized that we had an outpost looking out that hole or what, because it sure came in and blew that hole. It hit. Now, of course, I theorize that it hit just above the hole. And I theorize that because I heard it coming, so I stepped back. And it hit, and my face was covered. I still have foreign bodies in both eyes, but the top of my eye is clear, and the scar tissues and everything's on the bottom. So I think it hit above me, and it was all I had was burns from the stuff inside the mortar, and I have a scar on my shoulder where a piece of shrapnel took some skin off, but I think it hit above where I was standing.
Now, when it hit, were you blinded or knocked out, or?
Yeah, when I was hit, then of course, they came from. It was out in a barn, and they heard it, and so when I hollered, of course, and so they came, and the medics came and got me and took me down into the basement. Now, of course, there I don't remember anything after that but they cleaned off what they could, I guess, and probably put a patch on my shoulder, and I don't know how long I was in the basement there, because I'm sure they gave me a sedative, and the next thing I remember, I don't know how long it was, next thing I remember, they said a half-track got here to get out the wounded, and they took me out and put me, of course, my head was all covered with gauze and stuff, and put me in a half-track, and we went out somehow. And of course, you don't know when you can't see.
Right.
You just...
So they have your eyes covered up with bandages at that point?
Yeah, my whole head probably. Because they took me out in a half-track, and I don't remember anything. I see according to the records, and I had records there. I was in 3 hospitals. Well, I was in 2 hospitals before I was in a 3rd hospital, which was in Paris. Now I remember being in that hospital, but I don't remember being in any camp or any.
Right. Well, the other ones may just have been transitional. I think the real serious operating or real recuperation is in Paris.
Right. Yeah. And I remember in Paris, that's my first memories, that they came and they got me out of my bunk and put me on examining table, which I couldn't see because I still had my head all bandaged up. And the doctor took all of the bandages off my head and pried at my eyes. I don't remember seeing anything, but I could feel him lifting on my eyelids and so on. And he put clean gauze or Vaseline back on and bandaged my head all up. And I don't remember seeing him, or I don't remember him saying a word. All I remember is that he bandaged me all up again and put me back in a bunk. But I do remember that when I got in the bunk, I thought, and I said, "Well, God, you got a blind man. Now what you going to do with a blind man?" But it didn't really bother me or my faith, and if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. And from there, they put me on a plane, and we went to the First General Hospital in England, and that's where they did operations and got me so I could see. They did one thing that I've talked to doctors since then and who had never heard of such a thing, but they would put a gauze, well, I don't know what they had on it, but a little piece of gauze, and they'd stick it under my lower lid, and then they would stick some more under my upper lid, I don't know what, but there's always somebody standing beside me who would reach down every once in a while and check my pulse. So it must have been a tremendous whatever it was, but I understood them saying that what it was doing was this was spreading the top part of your eye, and so it was spreading the scar tissues apart so that it would form new scar tissues that would be clear enough that you could see through. But the eye doctor since then, they hadn't even heard of it, doing such a thing. That's what they did.
Yeah, well, they probably had to improvise a lot of things where they found something that worked. And
yeah, I did get allergic to the stuff that they was using to dilate your eyes. I don't know what it's called, but I know the eye broke out, the skin around my eye, and so they started using atropine, which is really a nose drop or something, and it dilates your eyes, and I wasn't allergic to that.
Do you remember starting to be able to see again?
Oh yes, in England, of course, the Red Cross is supposed to come and help you with letters and so on, but I wasn't high on their list, I guess. But I learned that if you take a card and stick a pin through it so it's just a little dinky hole, then you hold that card up to your eye, that you can move it and you can get in between those scar tissues, and then you can see through that little hole, and you can see well enough to write letters. So I used to write home to Beth practically every day by looking through a little pinhole.
So for a while there, I mean, you could open your eyes and you could see sort of there'd be light out there, and maybe vague shapes or something, but not much else except with that method.
And back then they were giving, what is that medicine, atropine? No, something they gave. But now they have longer stuff that lasts, but then they were giving it to you every hour shot. And I remember the nurse coming in and to give me my shot at night, and I would stick out my arm, and I said, "You don't need to make a noise or anything. You aren't going to find me asleep when you come in. I'll hear you." And so she tried to get in, but she never did. I always got my arm out for her to give me a shot. But then on Easter Sunday, by Easter Sunday of 45, I was able to see well enough to get a wheelchair and go down to chapel. But that's the first time I went out on my own.
Now, would they get you up and have you walk around in this period, or just leave you in bed the whole time?
I was in bed most of the time. I guess they got us up and walked us. They also gave me a shot. I don't, it's typhoid or something, but anyway, that would make you have a fever. And I remember the first time they did that, I didn't know what they was doing. They gave me a shot, so they gave me a shot, you know. Then later on, I got the chills. I would shake because I had a fever. And then finally, when I was shaking hard enough so it was making the bed rattle, I said to another patient in the room there, I said, "You better call the nurse." And so he did, and the nurse came in, and she said, "Oh, we've been waiting for this. You're supposed to get a fever, and that makes you have a chill. So we've been waiting for you to call." And so after that, whenever they would give me that shot, I would say, "No, I'm going to beat this. I'm not going to shiver." But I never could.
Now, do you know why they were doing? Was this just vaccination, or was it?
No, I was told that they gave me a fever because a fever heals your eye,
Okay.
and so they wanted me to have a fever.
Now, is that something your modern eye doctors have heard of?
No, they hadn't heard of that either. So, but that's what they said.
Now, how long was it then before you got shipped back to the States?
I don't know whether
Because you're in England in Easter, and then...
it was very shortly after that we went back, and I was considered a walking patient at the time because I could see well enough to not bump into chairs and all that sort of stuff. And so when I got on the boat, I was another big luxury liner, and it was a hospital ship, and there was areas where the men were still in bed, they couldn't get up. But since I was a walking patient, I could wander around the ship if I wanted to, which is nice.
Now, at that point, were they still zigzagging, or were they just sailing straight now?
Beg pardon?
When you were on the ship going back,
Yeah.
did that still zigzag, or?
They just went right straight.
Okay. We were talking about your return trip. You landed someplace in Canada.
Yeah, we landed in Canada. We came across from England to Canada in a luxury liner too, but they put us on a train, and we came by train, and we went back to that. Oh, I can't think.
Camp Miles Standish is the one that's listed on your service record.
Yeah. We went to Miles Standish, and then from Miles Standish they put us on buses, and I ended up at I was going to tell you the hospital, Valley Forge General Hospital, which is a big hospital, high hospital. And so there we were just in the hospital, and it's a beautiful, that hospital is a beautiful place. And there I almost got into trouble too, because you could get a weekend pass, and I wanted to go home to Michigan, and your weekend pass is from Friday night to Monday morning, and so I got one, and I went to, you go south as far as Pittsburgh, I think it is.
Or Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Maybe. Yeah.
Philadelphia, okay, wherever it was, and that's the limit, but you couldn't go any further, and I wanted to go to Michigan. So when I got off the train in Philadelphia,
Well, that could have been Pittsburgh then, potentially. Philadelphia south, Pittsburgh west, but yeah.
Well, whichever it was, I got off the train, and I looked there, and there was a bus station right across from the train station. And I went down there, and I got the schedule, and I see that I could take a bus from that town headed for Ann Arbor, Michigan. It went to Toledo, and you had to transfer to another bus that went right up 23 to Ann Arbor. And so it would have been out of bounds, but I said, so what? So then what can they do? I'm not AWOL. I'm just out of bounds. And I said, all they can do is an MP could take me off the bus and put me on another bus to go back.
Yep.
So, but I got a bus ticket to go to Ann Arbor, and I was just in a uniform, and I didn't have anything on it. It wasn't even a PFC, it was just Army uniform. And so if an MP, I was over by the window always, if I could, and if I saw an MP, I just was sleeping. And sometimes I did get on, and I hear them coming up the aisle, and I was just sleeping. They never bothered me. So I went to Toledo, got on a bus, up 23, and the Willis Road, that's near where my folks lived, would get off at Willis Road, and then I'd walk about 3 miles to my parents' house. And so I'd get there, going that way, it'd be an overnight, so I'd get there in time for breakfast. And I surprised them, and I came in, and I had breakfast. Of course, they knew I wanted to go over and see Beth. We weren't married, but anyway, so they would let me take the car, and I would go and see Beth. And Dad called into Detroit to the train station and found out that the train called the Red Arrow went from Detroit right up past the hospital, Lunaville, I think it was called. I don't know, it was the name of the town, but anyway. And so on Saturday night, if I'd catch that train like 9 o'clock at night or something, it was an overnight, and you'd get there, and when you got off of the train, there would be a bus from Valley Forge Hospital, and you get on that bus, and you'd be considered on time as far as a hospital is concerned,
right,
if you were on that bus. So I could go, weekends I could go home. And so I did that, and of course Beth and I have been dating and writing and all of that, and so I suppose about the second weekend I went home, we decided that we would get married, and we set the date, and that we'd get married if we could get leave through the Red Cross. You could get a furlough, and she was going to work through Ann Arbor Red Cross, and I'd work through the Red Cross there at the hospital. And so we set a date and had all our plans made, and I got back to the hospital after the date had been set, and after we'd gotten furloughs, as far, they'd all approved so that we could do it, so I could go home. The doctor at the hospital called me down and examined me, and then he called me down a second time, and he said, your eyes are such condition, I think that a cornea transplant would be good. And so I've set the date of such and such a date. I says, I can't be here. He said, what? I said, I can't be here. I've already got furloughs, and I'm going to go home and get married. And he says, well, I've got that date set. If you go home and get married, you're not going to have that operation. And I said, I'm going home and get married. You know how a young guy is. And so I went home and got married, and when I got back to the hospital, the doctor called me back, and he gave me a very thorough exam, and he wrote on the record, his eyes have so improved that I don't recommend an operation. So I didn't get an operation. Well, years later, I remember particularly, of course, after I was discharged, I still, because I had this disability on my eyes, I had to get my eyes checked every year. It was just automatically.
Right.
And when I was in Chicago, to that doctor, he said, you know what? He said, I was there at Valley Forge in those years, and your operation probably would have been, almost first, at least the first few that we did, and they didn't turn out so well. He said, you got better eyesight now than if you'd stayed and gotten an operation. So I tell people that because I got married, I got better sight now than I used to have.
There you go.
But,
All right. Now, when did they actually discharge you?
in July, wasn't it?
Yeah, July 45. Okay.
July 45.
And when did you get married?
And before I was discharged.
Yeah. But did you get married in July or June or May or?
May 7th.
Okay. Yeah, you should remember your anniversary date.
Yeah, you should remember those.
And then, did your wife just stay home in Michigan until you got out?
No. That also caused a problem because she hadn't graduated from high school yet. In May the 7th, and they didn't graduate until June. And up until that time, if a high school student got married, they also quit school. They couldn't graduate. But wartime's different, And so she got married, and they let her continue to go to school to graduate. And so she did stay to school and graduate. But when she graduated, she came out there to Phoenixville, and we got an apartment. And so then she got a job out into the hospital in an ice cream parlor. We got an apartment in town. So until I got discharged. And one day in July of that year, the ward sergeant came to me and said, you've got a problem, and your eye condition's good enough so that we're going to discharge you from the hospital. Now, do you want a discharge so you get out of the Army, or do you want to send you back to active duty? Of course, by that time, the European theater had quit, but the South Pacific hadn't quit yet.
Yeah, Japan hadn't surrendered yet.
Yeah. So I said, well, no, I better get a discharge. So I got a medical discharge from the hospital. But she was living with me there.
Okay. All right. And then did you go back home to Michigan after that?
Yes, we came right back home to Michigan. And that's the next fall I started college and went through college and seminary.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
I went 1 year to Ypsilanti.
Eastern Michigan?
That's called Eastern Michigan. It was normal college when we back then. It was Eastern Michigan. But went 1 year there, and then 3 years at North Central in Illinois, and then 3 years at the Evangelical Theological Seminary, which was also in Naperville. So, but because I was wounded and I got a medical discharge, that put me under Public Law 16 for college, and not just the GI Bill, which gave me 4 years paid, 4 years of college, and 1 year of seminary. And so I got my education paid for by the government because of that. And then I was able to get what they called a student charge, be a pastor of the church for my last 2 years of seminary.
Okay.
So I got through all my education without a great big bill.
Right. Okay. Now, when you started up in college, did your wife work for a while? Or
Oh yeah, when we were in Naperville, she worked out at a truck stop as a waitress. And, yeah, she had jobs. that helped with finances too.
Okay. And then once you completed seminary, did you get a church someplace, or what
Well, I
happened?
had the last 2 years of my seminary. I was already serving here in Michigan at a little church at Cloverdale in North and South Maple Grove Church. So I was already serving by the time I graduated. Yeah, and went from there.
Okay. And what denomination were you?
Well, that was with the Evangelical United Brethren Church that united with the Methodist Church to become the United Methodist. So that's where I've been all the time. I had one church out at K-Pac, that's over near Flint. But that's the only time I had a church on the east side of the state, and that was before that was the Evangelical United Brethren, and after the union with the Methodists, I have always been on the west side of the state.
And I guess the Methodists, my understanding is they move people around a lot. You're in a church for a certain number of years.
I could almost know that in 4 years we'd move again.
All right. Now, to look back at the time you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you take out of that?
Well, I guess that's kind of my theology. It didn't bother me like it bothered a lot of people, because I figured God knows what He's doing. I you just live and know that somehow it's going to work out. That's all. And actually, looking back at it, it was a good thing, because we were a very poor family. We used to get the Christmas gifts from the churches and stuff like that. And if I hadn't been drafted, and if I hadn't gone to the Army, and if I hadn't been wounded, and if I hadn't got Public Law 16, I'm not sure that I'd even been a pastor, because I don't know how I could afford it. And so that's kind of my theology. God knows what He's doing, and you just have to accept that.
Right.
Whatever you do, whatever He does.
All right. Now, before I turn this off, one thing I remember you mentioning off camera, there was something about being in Hatton, being in the German town where you were eventually wounded. Something about the Germans trying to attack you with a half-track or something like that?
Well, when I was wounded, we were in this little town of Hatton, which was surrounded. Actually, the Germans had control of the next town, Riedershofen, and we were just there in a 6-block area of the whole town of Hatton. And they had control of all the other rest of the town. But of course, some of us got wounded, like I did, and some others. And so an American, our own half-track, used to come in through woods, as I see it, to the north. Now, directions may not be right, but it crossed an open field past a train depot and come into where we were holed up, because they had all the rest, and take out the wounded the same way. And I think I was on the second trip that they got in there to get people out. And then I heard later, that was in the wintertime, and I heard later that they had a snowstorm, but the Americans did come in, it must be with more than one half-track, or made more than one trip, and took all the Americans out of this area, so they got out. So everybody, after I was wounded and taken down as a wounded, I think all the others I heard got out. Because the Americans came in and got them.
I didn't really want to stay there after all.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's no reason for them to be there in the first place, except that's where we were.
All right. Okay. I think then that probably takes care of things for us. So I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, that's all right. And I guess you can, I'm not sure if those
We will,
be
we will add, you've got a written memoir here, we'll add that to the end of the interview, so if you're
Yeah,
watching this,
that's-
be looking for that in our file.
This is, I don't know if you wanna write a note on that, because, see, that, their pages are numbered,
Right,
but that's only a part of my autobiography. And, cause my autobiography goes, of course, from the time I was born to, what was it, 1970, I think.
all right. Thank you.